So hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's digital programming. For those just joining us, I'm Ben Speggen. I'm the Vice President at the Jefferson and am a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. Joining me for the conversation today is Dr. Avi Loeb. Despite not wearing one here, Dr. Loeb is a man of many hats. He is the chair of the astronomy department at Harvard University, the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative, the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, the chair of the Board of Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies and the advisory board for the Breakthrough Starshot Project, and he is the author of the forthcoming Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. He is also the author of a recent op-ed, A Sobering Astronomical Reminder of COVID-19, published by Scientific American and announced just yesterday by the White House on Monday, April 20th. He has been appointed to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. No stranger to Erie, Pennsylvania, Dr. Loeb presented Extraterrestrial Life, Are We Alone? At the Jefferson's Global Summit in November 2019 in front of a sold-out crowd at Penn State Barron. We're going to discuss science in the wake of COVID-19, what astronomy can teach us, and the importance of Earth Day. We're going to work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, just leave it in the comment section below, and I'll try to get to that. And of course, for more information about upcoming Jefferson Educational Society programs and publications, please visit www.jeserie.org and like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Dr. Avi Loeb, welcome back to the Jefferson.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you here. And I noted in the intro the recent op-ed, a sobering astronomical reminder from COVID-19, published in Scientific American, as well as the news of your recent appointment to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. I want to start first with PCAST. What does this mean for someone with already a quite full plate?
Well, life is about priorities, and there is always more to do than time. We live for a short time, and we have to decide what is most important. And for me, I feel that I have an important duty to contribute based on my knowledge to the prosperity and the health of our nation and the world. And as a result, I'm happy to serve on committees and boards that promote the use of science for the benefit of our children, the future of our children. Personally, I mean, scientists were in news conferences during the COVID-19 pandemic, and my view on that is that we should let this pandemic serve as our moon landing moment, in which the political system will decide to boost considerably the funding of science. Not just for the political benefit of elevating national pride or at the expense of other nations, but for the prosperity and health of our children in all nations worldwide.
So one of the, I love how you liken that to the moon landing, and just historically give us a little bit of insight into what that meant for the people at the time, and why that's such an apt comparison, that this is our moon landing moment.
Yes, so in the 60s, people were extremely excited about the prospects of landing a human on the moon, and because it was not just a small step forward, it was a new way of realizing our place. And the fact that, we used for millennia to be on this planet, and now for the first time, a human would step on a surface that is not associated with the Earth. And that was a dramatic moment, and when Kennedy announced it, and then afterwards when it was actually accomplished by Apollo 11. And it inspired many young people and a whole generation. Science is not just about developing iPhones and technologies that can be useful for our daily life. It's also providing inspiration and it can promote the reality that we live in to a completely different level. And the way I see it is that science is also encouraging collaboration. We view our entire civilization as one. It's not nations fighting each other. It's instead something that we share. It's instead of being a zero-sum game, as we often think about life, that if I benefit, someone else loses. Instead of that, science is all about an infinite sum game, in the sense that, when we learn something new about nature, everyone can benefit from that. And there is an infinite horizon to learning and benefiting. It's not as if we're taking away anything by making progress in science. So that quality of science, the fact that it's for the benefit of humanity as a whole, and that it is unlimited. The pursuit of knowledge is not limited. We currently have some knowledge. It's a small island in an ocean of ignorance. And really, science is the shield that we have against dangers like COVID-19. And it's not the only one. Pandemics are not the only risks that happen, once in a century, that cost us trillions of dollars and can cost the lives of millions of people. That's not the only risk that we have once a century. We could have, for example, an impact of an asteroid, the same type that hit Chelyabinsk, which is an unpopulated area in 2013. The same thing if it hit, for example, a populated area like in New York City, could cause damage, in terms of human lives and financial damage, not lower than COVID-19 worldwide. We want to protect ourselves against dangers of this type, and our best weapon, our best shield is science. And I think, science should receive as much funding as other issues that concern us about national security. We often worry about other nations, but there are threats of the type of COVID-19 that are a matter of national security that can cost a lot of lives and cause a significant financial downturn that would bring science to the forefront in terms of saving us those expenses. And then the cost of COVID-19 so far, to the stock market, the trillions of dollars, it's bigger than all the money, all the funds that were allocated to the National Science Foundation, NIH, since their foundation, since they were founded. So I think it makes a lot of sense to think long-term, politically speaking, and invest in science.
One of the things that I think you capture so well in that op-ed, published just days ago for Scientific American is the quote, "Science has no borders." And you were talking about science is not a zero sum, but rather an infinite sum. And I think that's so well put. And for anybody tuning in, we will have a link to that particular piece in the comments section for those to click on that. But Dr. Loeb, I think science has a real moment to teach all of us and an opportunity to come together. And you had mentioned, funding being important for that. Simply put, if you had the ability to steer more funding, how does that happen quickly? And aside from funding, what lessons do you think science has to teach us right now about our interconnectedness as one people on one planet?
Yes. So to answer your second question first. The benefits we get from science can be shared. They're not, just one second.
That's quite all right.
They are not limited. The benefits are not limited to any group of people. Scientific knowledge is something that everyone can benefit from. And as a result, science is international, and you might think of establishing an organization that would not just worry about the health of the public health, but also about everything associated with science that could benefit humanity, and collaborate among nations on that. You know, there are, if you look at the populations in different countries, there are, you know, brilliant people, presumably, that could contribute to science in places where they cannot really get the proper education and the proper training. And by having international collaborations and establishing goodwill among nations, I think it will promote not only science, but also you know, collaborations, political collaborations among nations. And we should realize that, you know, just like this pandemic showed us, it doesn't distinguish between rich and poor, between people from one country and another. We all share the same fate. And, you know, there are some risks of this type, and we should work together to fight them. And science offers the best approach for this. And, you know, if we had all the data that was possible to get from what happened, all the lessons that were possible from what happened in China, perhaps we would have reacted differently early on. And therefore, it's clear that the collaboration is the key, and scientific analysis of data without assuming anything, without prejudice, is the right way to approach things. I should say that science also brings humility, because, you know, nature has a very subtle way of educating us. Mother Nature, you know, following a century of scientific and technological advances that triggered the unprecedented economic growth, our civilization perceived its superiority over nature as undisputed. But you know, a small virus that has much less information content than our brain is now able to wreck our economy and threaten to kill us, causing as much damage from the side effects that it triggers in our society in terms of the reaction to it, as from its direct medical impact. So that should teach us humility. That should educate us that, you know, we should never be arrogant. We should always recognize that, you know, we depend on our environment, and you know, it could be hostile at times, but really science offers us the best way to cope with these dangers.
Well, and one of the standout lines for me in your recent op-ed for Scientific American is that, quote, "Nature is teaching all humans, rich and poor, to be humble." And I think that speaks to what you were just saying. And I think that how you go on to unpack where humans fall in the timeline of Earth, that, you know, there has been much to come before us, and yet we have this interesting way of interacting with nature. And I think primitive is the word you used in the piece describing the virus, that here's a primitive virus that has no regard for the world that we've built in the world. Why do you think that this seems to be a lesson that we don't learn well from nature? Nature is trying to teach us, and it's been trying to teach us for a while in various different ways, but as a whole, it seems like we're slow to learn these lessons. Why is that?
Well, there is a tendency among humans to feel powerful, to you know, part of it stems from an illusion. I mean, we feel empowered by small achievements, and you know, we get the sense that perhaps we are more powerful than we actually are. Now, of course, we all know that we will die one day, right? So the day will come, but we ignore that. And, you know, a pandemic is a reminder of the fact that our life is short. It's a reminder that we are not as powerful as we think, and that we should never be arrogant. We should accept all the good that life gives us with gratitude and humility, you know, and you know, that's important also in dealing with other people. We should not feel superior to other people. We should not try to take advantage of other people. I think, you know, it's important for everyone to remember that we are all sharing, you know, a similar fate. And and we should be grateful for that for the time being, as long as we can. And humans tend to forget that. But if you study astronomy, I tell my students in my freshman seminar class that life is an afterthought in the universe. The universe started with just hydrogen and helium, and we are made mostly of water, that includes an oxygen atom, and of carbon, all these biological molecules that have carbon in them. And oxygen and carbon were made at the interiors of stars. They are just the ashes of the fuel that burned up inside stars. And so this is just a byproduct of stars burning their fuel. And we came as a result of that. And, we live on a planet we call our home, Earth, but we are surrounded by lifeless space, that there is no life out there. Life is not possible, in most of the volume around us. And, we should be just grateful that we have this opportunity and enjoy the moment that we have, but never be arrogant. I mean, that's what astronomy teaches us. And that's what I try to convey to the freshmen in my class. The other thing I should say about nature is that now, when we have the lockdown due to COVID-19, I used to commute to work every morning for half an hour. I have this time for myself to jog. And I jog, near the woods, not far from my house. And what I see is some kind of an awakening of nature, because, there is not much traffic, no airplanes, and the birds are singing much louder than I remember them doing. I see flocks of wild turkeys. I see rabbits running around, and I get a sense that nature was sort of suppressed for a little while by us, and now it's awakening as a result of the fact that we are closed at our homes.
And two things I'll add into there. I just had a conversation with James and Deborah Fallows, correspondents for The Atlantic and authors of the best-selling book, Our Town's 100,000-Mile Journey into the Heart of America. And when I asked them, what are you listening to, which, I have a list of lightning round questions I want to get to with you. But one of the questions was, what are you listening to? And Deb so beautifully put that, being inundated with so much information as we are these days, she's been opening her window in Washington, D.C. because the birds are more loudly singing. And I couldn't help but quickly share with her just the other day, a wild turkey was in my backyard that my dog took off running after. So you're absolutely right there with nature finding a way to return. And we can certainly see how I think that's a very apt word for it, suppressed, that perhaps it's been suppressed. You mentioned you were jogging. That's part of your new routine. One of the lines that also struck me in your op-ed in Scientific American is you say, personally, I practiced social distancing long before it became trendy. And that seems common, amongst scientists. And you mentioned the accomplishments of Sir Isaac Newton. He developed calculus, optics, and realized the nature of gravity when isolating during the Great Plague. So two things I'd like you to expand on is your finding of humans as monads, which you reference in the op-ed, and then your claim of social distancing benefiting free thinking. So monads and free thinking.
Yes, so I should first say that even though Newton made important discoveries on his own during the plague, most scientists that I know now, these days, work in groups and are affected by social trends as much as the general public. Social media is very powerful. Part of it is that young scientists aspire to get permanent jobs, and they cater to the wishes of the senior people who want to promote their egos, want to promote their ideas. And so you end up with echo chambers where, groups of people just do the same thing, even though on occasion it makes no sense. And they go on a tangent for decades, and they can do things that are completely disconnected from reality without getting any feedback and without actually aspiring to get evidence, because that would ruin their picture. It's very similar to, groups of people that have a belief in something and prefer not to listen to evidence. And it's unfortunate because science is supposed to be all about evidence. We should be subjecting our hypothesis to a test with nature. Science is about a dialogue with nature. We hear, we listen to nature, we collect evidence, data, and we revise our notions about the world accordingly. And if you look at the history of science, a lot of the ideas that we discovered were the result of experimental data that was unexpected. Quantum mechanics came without anyone expecting it. It's not like someone sat in an office and dreamt out quantum mechanics before it was discovered. On the contrary, and even after it was confirmed by experiments, Einstein had a problem with it, philosophical problem with it. So I see it more as a learning experience. We need to listen to nature and learn from that. And so, I'm not sure that scientists learned the lesson from Newton's experience. We're still, there are large groups of people that are completely divorced from experimental data, doing their own thing, and do not even recognize that they should do something different. They just have a prejudice about an idea or a mathematical concept, and they dismiss other concepts just because of social pressure, just because senior people promote this direction. And I find that discouraging, because at the same time, this community of people is very tied up to those ideas and do not allow others to explore other ideas. That's unfortunate. But I should say that the reason I talk about monads is, we are born into this world alone. Each of us is born as a baby, and we start thinking about the world independently. And then at some age nowadays, people get connected to social media, and they start to wish to have as many likes as they can. That's not a good idea. You want to think about the world independently, because many times other people might be wrong. You might see evidence for something that others do not notice, and you want to think critically. And we are a collection of people, but we are a collection of individuals, of people that should think independently. Now, in the animal kingdom, you do find this approach of being in a herd, because that makes you more powerful. If you are in a herd, in Africa, lions or giraffes or whatever, you get the benefit of having a group protecting you, and so that's obviously beneficial. But as humans, we can survive as individuals. There is no need to be in a herd, and in fact, I think the biggest discoveries in science or otherwise come from people thinking independently. And that's what I try to encourage among my students and colleagues. And I should say that Leibniz thought about people as monads, as he had this philosophy where he said each of us is a separate entity. He was thinking more like atoms, independent from each other. And that's what I try to encourage in people I work with, to think independently and creatively. I think you end up finding the truth this way, rather than chasing the most number of likes on Twitter.
So just a lighthearted question, as somebody who says they were practicing social distancing before it became trendy, do you have tips and tricks for the rest of us who weren't doing that prior to COVID-19 and us now finding the new world in which we live? Any tips and tricks you've got for us?
Well, I think one of the interesting situations that you are brought to with COVID-19, especially people that live on their own, that do not have a family or a partner in their apartment, is that you have to find what to do with your time. And it's interesting because a lot of people have content or interests that are tied up to other people. But the situation forces you to find content on your own. And for myself, I should say, for decades, I just didn't have enough time to listen to music, for example, from classical music that I liked as a child, as a teenager. And now I have a chance of going back and listening to it because I have more free time. Fewer people request my attention. And I find that extremely relaxing and enriching. Of course, over the past few decades, there are new performers. You know, when I grew up, all the famous performers were white males. Now there are, you know, women, extremely talented young women that I find to perform amazingly well. And so I see that, you know, the world has changed for the better. But overall, it's, to me, this is an enriching experience. I still fill up my day, but with content that I select that is better tuned to what I like. So when you deal with people, you're often distracted. You know, you have to attend to their preferences and so forth. And when you have time for yourself, you can pretty much decide how to spend it to your liking. And instead of having a void that, you know, is empty and unfilled, you can actually fill it with a lot of good stuff nowadays because of the internet and so forth.
One of the things that you had mentioned earlier was with young scientists pursuing what older academics might be pursuing, and the interest is there of chasing something. One of the other things that you've recommended for young scientists is to become a generalist, to eschew chasing the narrow and the hot topics of the day, and really to be a generalist. Why do you make that recommendation to young scientists?
Well, it basically follows the rules of Darwin. You know, when circumstances change, and it happens every few years in science, that new horizons are being discovered, new ways of thinking about the nature come into play, then someone that is a generalist, that has a general toolkit, could adapt to those changing circumstances much better than someone that is a specialist. So if you're a specialist, you pretty much continue to drill very deep in the same direction, and you might eventually reach the bottom, you know, of your field. You know, you become the expert, the world expert, but there is nothing to dig into beyond a certain point. And then you just work on nuances. And however, if you're a generalist, you can move to another interesting field of research and explore new territories and use your toolkit that is more general and broad to explore other subjects. And I should mention an example. Just in 2013, I gave a lecture at a winter school about a new frontier that I considered exciting at the time, that was not really well developed. It's using gravitational waves, ripples in space and time, to learn about the universe instead of light. You know, traditionally astronomy was all about light. Telescopes collect light from stars or galaxies far away, and that was it. You look at the images, you learn about the universe. But there is another way to do that, and you know, that's based on Einstein's theory of gravity, that in fact, if you have compact objects like black holes and they collide, they produce a storm in space and time. They produce ripples, just like waves on the surface of a pond. And those waves can move all the way from the edge of the universe and be detected on Earth. And so I was discussing in my lecture this possible frontier in astronomy that would be based on gravitational waves detection. And after 10 minutes into my talk, one of the other lecturers in that winter school stood up and said, "Why are you wasting the time of these students on a subject that will not be useful for their research in their lifetime? You're just wasting their time." And I said, well, it's an interesting subject. We might actually detect gravitational waves one day. And then 2 years later, the LIGO experiment detected the first source in gravitational waves, and it received the Nobel Prize a few years later for that, a couple of years later. And so the students that I was lecturing to were still finishing their PhDs, their doctoral thesis, at the time of the LIGO detection. And this just shows you that many scientists prefer to do things traditionally, conservatively, along lines that were defined before. I mean, it helps in terms of getting jobs because, you know, people already work in these areas and they appreciate, but it doesn't help in terms of uncovering new frontiers. And if you are a generalist, you are open-minded, you go into virgin territories and you find new things.
So I absolutely love your approach to that and your recommendation for young people, and to see that there's proof in the pudding, as folks would say, with the fact that just a few years later, something that you're talking to them about becomes a reality. So I've got to ask you, as a father and as a professor dealing with young people on a daily basis, how do you think the experience of social distancing and virtual education now are going to shape communication and the learning amongst younger people, the new generation up? This has to have a lasting effect, right?
Yeah, so first of all, I see it already with students. They realize that reality is fragile, that, you know, you cannot trust, you know, that if you sign up to study at a university, that you will be able to finish the semester studying there. You have to realize that, you know, things can change and your life can change, and it makes your sense of security shaken, you know, and you worry about the things. And I know that young people worry about the prospects of getting a job. You know, that's another issue. And I think what it would make is a generation of young people that will have a more difficult time, you know, getting their way. So they will develop unique skills. They will work harder to accomplish things that were easier in the past. They might also get a sense of, you know, the fact that all humans share the same, you know, fate, and that collaboration and science are important. That's what I hope, certainly. And my goal as a father of two girls is to make the world better for them in the future. So instead of reacting to pandemics of this type, trying to prepare for them in advance, being smarter, that saves a lot of wasted money and a lot of, you know, wasted lives.
So I want to pivot just for a second away from COVID-19, and I do want to say I think you're absolutely right of the preparedness, and I think a lot of what you've written recently with Scientific American helps us understand that. And again, for folks watching along, we'll include the links for those of how science can help us prepare. I want to pivot though to your book, because I mentioned it in the intro. Can you give us a sneak peek of the forthcoming book, Extraterrestrial: The First Signs of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth?
Yeah, so this is a book that is expected to come out on January 26, 2021. I'm just finishing the last touches on the content these days. And in fact, being locked down at home helps me, gives me a little more time to finish everything. And the book is really about the search for life beyond Earth and how we might find it. And here again, as I was talking about before, people have prejudice. You know, many people think they know the truth. There are many scientists that think that we are unique, we are special, life is special, Earth is rare, and it doesn't exist elsewhere. And we are at the center of the living universe. Now, of course, that's natural, you know, because when I had my young daughters grow up when they were infants, they tended to think that they're at the center of the world, you know, and it's very natural to do that. But as they matured, they realized that there are other people out there and they are not at the center. So I think our civilization eventually will mature, and it's a sign of not being mature to claim that we are unique, and it's a sign of arrogance, okay? And the question is, how do we go about discovering that we are not alone? And, you know, it might be by searching for microbial life, a primitive life, or it might be through the search for signs from other civilization, technological civilizations. And it's not clear which approach will be more successful because we just don't know what is out there. So we should do searches for both. And the mainstream in astronomy right now is just focused on searching for primitive life, for microbial life. And whenever you mention technological civilizations, people dismiss that. And here again, there is this herd mentality, which I find unfortunate because the public actually is very interested in the latter. And the public is providing the funds to support science. So how dare we scientists not listen to the wishes of the public and address an important question that is perhaps the most important question in science? Are we alone? And in this book, I try to describe, an unusual visitor that we had to the solar system that could have been some debris from another civilization. We don't know. We didn't collect enough evidence about it, but it had very peculiar properties. It's Oumuamua, the first interstellar object to visit the solar system. I describe its properties, why it's unusual, how did people react to it, and why I think that we should be more open-minded to the possibility that we might discover signs of advanced civilizations, technological civilizations out there.
So that's such a wonderful sneak peek at that. I don't want to push you on the book because I want to encourage folks to get it when it comes out in January. And certainly I know we're all going to be tuned in for that. One more question on COVID, and then I want to try to get through a lightning round with you. Going back to Scientific American yet once again, you had an op-ed there with Andy Burkert, and you talked about flattening the curve, and that's something that's prior to COVID-19 I don't think was part of any of our daily language, but yet now it is. When you run into someone who doesn't understand why flattening the curve is so important, how do you briefly and simply explain that to them so that it makes sense in hopes that they get it, as this is a good tool, one of our best tools at fighting the pandemic?
Well, it's very simple. We should just look at two examples, China versus Italy. So Italy was infected by Chinese tourists that arrived there, and with a time delay, of course. China put very strict restrictions on mobility of people as soon as they realized the extent of this disease. And as a result, within a couple of months, they were able, through social distancing, to flatten the curve, basically suppress the rate of infections by keeping people indoors, so that, the reason that this pandemic grows, they infect so many people, is because people come in contact with each other. They touch surfaces, and then other people touch the same surface, and the virus is transferred. The virus has no legs. It's just transferred from one person to another through surfaces or through droplets in the air if you are very close to another person. So if you just limit those ways of transferring the virus from one person to another, so that each person that is infected does not infect even a single other person, infects less than one person on average, then the spread of the disease will be suppressed. Eventually, it will die off. And it will die off exponentially. But if each person on average infects more than one person, then it actually grows exponentially. And social distancing is simply trying to limit the number of people that you come in contact with, so that you suppress the growth of the spread of the virus. And so what happened in China was that they got it under control. But what happened in Italy is that they allowed this, the society to maintain its usual activities. And, the Italians are very personal. They hug each other, they kiss, they are very physical. And in fact, it all started from a soccer match that was attended by 40,000 Italians and a Spanish audience as well in Milan and Bergamo, the town from where most of the Italian spectators came. They went back there, and they interacted with Chinese tourists, and as a result, they got Italy infected and Spain as well, and they haven't reacted to the virus for a while. They didn't practice any social distancing, and then their hospitals were flooded with people. So the issue with that is, if the hospitals are full and beyond capacity, then the death toll is much higher because people cannot get proper treatment. They cannot be put on ventilators. They cannot be attended to. Many people die at home. And so the death rate, the likelihood of death from the virus could increase by a factor of 10. So in Italy, there were many more dead people per people infected than in a place like Wuhan in China and in places where social distancing was practiced. So the main reason to flatten the curve is so that hospitals will be able to treat people. It doesn't solve the problem, by the way. There are still people that could get infected. So until you have a vaccine or until the virus disappears because of the fact that it mutates to something else, the weather gets warmer and somehow disappears, or because simply you track each and every person that is infected and prevent that person from infecting others. So unless you do that, you haven't solved the problem. Social distancing is just limiting the spread. It doesn't, eliminate the virus unless you find some other solutions.
All right, Dr. Loeb, are you ready for the lightning round now? And then we'll cap it off with a quick talk on Earth Day. So a lightning round, favorite planet other than Earth that you find most interesting?
We don't have planet B. Earth is our home. The nearest habitable planet, a planet that we can inhabit, is next to the nearest star, Proxima Centauri. It's called the Proxima B. And we don't know if it has liquid water on its surface, but it has the right temperature and it has an atmosphere. And, but Mars is closer to us, much closer to us. It will take a long time to reach Proxima B. And so perhaps if I had to choose a planet to go to, I would choose Mars, but Mars doesn't have an atmosphere like the Earth. It lost its atmosphere because it's a tenth of the mass of the Earth, so it just couldn't retain its atmosphere. It may have had life early on, but then it lost it together with its liquid water. So actually, I don't really have a favorite planet that we can get to, in my lifetime that would be as hospitable as Earth is. So we better take good care of this planet.
Great answer. Speaking of Mars, which do you anticipate first? The colonization of Mars or the confirmation of extraterrestrial life?
That depends on how abundant extraterrestrial life is. But given my approach, I think that we are not special. I think that, we know that about a quarter of all the stars have a planet similar to the Earth with a similar surface temperature, roughly the size of the Earth, that could have liquid water on its surface. And there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way alone, the Milky Way galaxy, our own. So I think that the life is probably very common. And it may not be the same as life on Earth, because if you look at the cookbooks, you see that from the same ingredients, you can bake many different cakes. And so we are not necessarily the best cake around. We might not be the smartest kid on the block. So if I had to guess, just based on this principle of mediocrity, that the fact that we are probably not the smartest kid on the block and that life is very abundant, I would say that discovering evidence for life elsewhere would precede going to Mars. Now, I should say that next year there would be a few rovers, 3 rovers that will get to Mars and search for evidence that life may have existed already on Mars early on when it had an atmosphere and liquid water. So, it might be as early as a couple of years from now that we will learn that life existed not just on Earth, but also on Mars.
So if you were offered a trip to the International Space Station, would you go?
Of course. I mean, I would actually, I asked the students in my class, my freshman seminar class, if, extraterrestrials came over and suggested that you board their spacecraft and go on a one-way trip, would you take it? And they said yes. And under one condition, they said, that we can maintain communication with our friends and send them selfies and share, photos through social media. So that was a precondition. They really wanted that. I found that surprising, because to me, that just the experience of doing something different, who cares whether you share it with other people? If you climb the Everest, you don't care if other people see it. You just care about, achieving that milestone. Anyway, but then I also asked them, would you do the same with a spacecraft that goes into a black hole? Once again, you can go and see something that you have never seen. And they said, definitely not, because they cannot share the experience once they go into the black hole.
That's fascinating. Audience question is, how life has been on Earth for how long, remind us?
Well, we don't know exactly, but there is evidence for life 3.7 billion years ago. And possibly it started as early as 4.2 billion years ago. And the Earth itself, the solar system was made 4.6 billion years ago. So, relatively soon after the Earth cooled, life started.
And then follow-up question, that intelligent life, how long has that been on Earth?
Oh, that has been, much shorter than that. The first humans left Africa about 100,000 years ago. So it's very recent that, intelligence arose, maybe 1 million years ago. So, but I should say that if we were to use chemical rockets to get to the nearest star, the type of rockets that NASA launches all the time, it would take us about 50 to 100,000 years to reach the nearest star, Proxima Centauri. So if we wanted to reach it now, we should have launched it when the first humans left Africa. That's a long time ago. The journey is very long. And that's why I was sort of pessimistic that we will ever reach those destinations that are very far away. Now, intelligence might have started, much before 100,000 years ago, but still, it's a minuscule time interval relative to the age of the Earth.
Another audience question: your thoughts? Any thoughts on UFOs?
Well, I think that it's unlikely that the reports that we often hear are real, because they're all based on anecdotal evidence that does not stand up to the scrutiny of science. And the evidence I have that it may not be real is that, for decades, people claim to always detect something that is at the sensitivity limit of the cameras or the instruments that are used to detect it. But our cameras improved dramatically over the past few decades. We now have detectors that are much, much better, much more sophisticated than we used to have 30 years ago. So you would expect that if the evidence 30 years ago for UFOs was real, that by now, with modern technology, we would be able to see very clear confirmation of that. But we don't. So it's always on the borderline of believability. And as a result of that, I tend to believe that it's an artifact, that it may not be real. It may be just, it could be just a fluke, a mirage, or it could be, some military exercises that are not known to the public, that the public is detecting here and there. And, we just don't know the true origin of these events.
Last lightning round question, and then a couple about Earth Day. So there's a meteor shower visible tonight. Are you headed out to watch it?
Yeah, I hope to watch it with my daughters, yes.
Excellent. So one of the things that you recently shared with us, and we at the Jefferson are going to be sharing that with our audience as well, is that tomorrow, Wednesday, April 22nd, is Earth Day, and you recorded a 1-minute video for Earth Day. Why was that important for you to do?
Well, as I mentioned before, it's important for me to stress the fact that science is our biggest treasure, and we should try to put it at a higher priority than other concerns that we have at the moment, right? And because it allows us to find solutions to problems that affect everyone. And I felt that, since we don't have planet B, that we should preserve our planet and do the best we can to keep humanity healthy and prosperous. And the best way to do that is through science and through collaboration. Hostilities are just a waste of time and effort. If you look at human history, much of it was wasted because of hostilities. And, I define intelligence as the ability to promote your well-being. And if you think about it, most of the time we do things that do not promote our well-being. And that includes fighting other people, trying to damage other people, and so forth. It doesn't promote anyone's interests. To me, it shows us a lack of intelligence on our part. And if I imagine some, creatures that are more intelligent than us, these would be creatures that always try to invest their time and effort in a positive direction, in a constructive direction, trying to find solutions to problems. And that's, in principle, what science offers us. It's an opportunity to collaborate, an opportunity to approach evidence in a way that will benefit us all.
So Dr. Loeb, you've been so generous with your time, and I appreciate that so much. Just one final question. On Earth Day, if you had a magic wand, I know you're a scientist, but let's delve into the world of magic for a second. If you had a magic wand, and aside from what I think a lot of us are thinking about right now, which would be a vaccine for COVID-19, what would you wave the wand for on Earth Day? What's the one thing you would do right now here in 2020 on Earth Day as a scientist that would be for the good of us all?
Yes, I would basically try to promote this miracle of making everyone, all humans, humble, not arrogant, and collaborative, trying to work together to solve our problems, approaching evidence with the respect that it deserves, without prejudice, basically approaching life just like kids do. So in my book, science is the opportunity to maintain your childhood curiosity. As we become adults, we often chase other objectives. We promote our egos, we chase honors, all kinds of issues that are not necessarily truthful and honest and humble. And if I had this magic wand, I will turn everyone into children all over again.
Dr. Avi Loeb, what a fantastic conversation. The chair of the astronomy department at Harvard, a man who wears many, many hats, including a new one now being on the President's Council of Advisors for Science and Technology, and the author of the forthcoming Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to join us today for this Jefferson program.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to all watching at home. We appreciate you tuning in. To find out more information about both upcoming as well as past Jefferson events and publications, visit our website at jeserie.org and like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speggen. Be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us today. But goodbye.